that socioeconomic conditions determine people's behavior doesn't come as a surprise. Indeed, common sense as well as daily experience leave us in no doubt about it. What may come as a surprise is the sheer depth down to which socioeconomic conditions may penetrate the psychological texture of a whole population subjected to them. Lars Hornuf, professor of finance at the University of Bremen, investigates how cheating behavior and charitable giving differs between individuals from a socialist and a capitalist upbringing. At a research symposium hosted by the Leadership Excellence Institute Zeppelin, Professor Lars Hornuf presented his and his collaborators' results.
So, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here to the Zeppelin University. And I'm delighted to present one of my papers here, which has a very long title, namely The Impact of Two Different Economic Systems on Dishonesty and Charitable Giving, Determinants of Group-Level Variation. So you don't have to remember the title, but the most important thing is it's about dishonesty and charitable giving among East and West Germans, and we would refer to them as people living in socialist or formerly socialist regions and formerly more capitalist regions. Okay, so what we did is we came up with 4 hypotheses, and we said like, well, actually people should differ in their dishonesty and potentially also pro-social behavior if they're on one of the 2 systems. And we would say maybe it's even socialism that decays morals, because in a socialist system most often you actually had to cheat actually to get some economic goods that weren't available for you. And actually, it might have made sense to cheat in front of the secret police because there was no other way you could do it. And so you adopted to this over time and you did it over and over again. You might not have felt bad about it because it was the only thing you could do at the time, but you learned how to do this kind of behavior. And in a second step, and I can tell you in our first study, we actually found out that people differed in their behavior and they actually differed in their cheating behavior. And then we said, like, we have to run a second study to find more out about the channel, how that works. And so we thought an interesting channel to look at is, what is if people after reunification saw the other system? And then had this idea, and he said, like, maybe it's upward social comparison. They actually see how the other system works, then they felt betrayed, and then they said, well, now I'm also eligible to cheat, which I wasn't before, maybe. Okay. And we also would argue that it actually matters how long you were exposed to the system. Let's say if you lived your entire youth in a socialist system or in a capitalist system, this should have a larger impact upon you as if you were born just a couple of years before the reunification. You didn't really learn a lot about socialism. You never joined the pioneer troops or whatever, and you don't know how the system worked, for instance. And finally, we would have said that also pro-social giving behavior might differ, and there's a lot of evidence in the literature on that already. But we would say people under a socialist system, actually, they have kind of learned potentially how redistribution works. And this might have been to the good or to the worse, because redistribution might have not worked that well under socialism. On the other hand, they might have more experience in redistribution and might be more willing to also give for a charitable cause. Okay, so what did we do? So we run 2 studies. The first one we run in Berlin. We did this in various different regions of the city, in 6 administrative regions and 9 different citizen centers. And we did the same study again in Leipzig and in Dortmund. And this is actually the variation we want to use. And here you can see it again. So in one of the 2 regions, people are pretty distant from each other, namely Leipzig and Dortmund. And in Berlin, it was again divided into an eastern part and a western part, and their people are pretty close to each other. So they could actually see how the other system worked, and they can see it every day if they go with the subway to their jobs on the other side of the city, for instance. But the important thing is, like, these are all Prussians. So if you're from Bavaria, you're well aware that these are all Prussian people over here. And so they should have the same kind of heritage. And they have the same opportunities in terms of jobs. You couldn't recognize if somebody talks to you because of their accent that they're East or West Germans. They are just pretty similar, more similar than people from Leipzig and Dortmund, for instance. Okay, so what did we find? So the first thing was we looked for the region. So we ran the study in Berlin, Leipzig and Dortmund, And in Berlin, we checked whether these are people from the East or from the West. And what you can see is that for people where we run the study in East Berlin, is that we actually found that cheating was 60%, so they reported the higher side of the die with a 60% probability. So actually that's not the cheating. Actually, if you report a 50% chance of reporting the higher side, this would be actually a fair die. So we report a 4, 5, and 6 with a 50% likelihood. And but what you can see is that in Berlin, East Germans reported these better sides of the die with a 60% probability. And for West Berlin, actually you see it's only 55. But this is actually quite a lot in terms of difference because it's twice as much. Because here you're deviating 5% from 50%, and here you're deviating 10%. So the difference is actually quite high. And this is also statistically significant at the 5% level. For people from Leipzig, they were cheating a little bit more, but not significantly so. And from Dortmund, they were quite similar to people from West Berlin, for instance. So there was no difference except if you were in Berlin and you were reporting to be East German. So we checked for the particular roles. And what you can see is that here you have a role of 1, or a payout of 1, a payout of 2, 3, 4, and so on. The blue columns show you the high cheaters, and the gray columns show you the low cheaters. And what you see is that for each payout or for each earning, the low cheaters always donate a higher percentage of the earnings as compared to the high cheaters. So we found this very interesting because it shows that apparently there's no moral cleansing going on. It's more that you have a certain personality trait in terms of if you're more willing to cheat, you're also less likely to donate something later on. Okay, so what did we find out? So we think, or we want to be very modest about our results actually. So what we want to say is, first of all, we think there's a difference between the two systems, and it had an impact on people's morality. However, we cannot say that there is a general impact of socialism on morals. So there must be a channel through that. And even though there might be other explanations, but we would say what becomes obvious is that if the system is more salient, as it is in Berlin, the other system, then we found that people are cheating more. However, there could be other stories about this, and I think we should investigate more research to find out how this actually comes about. But we think there is a difference for people who are in Berlin and can see each other, even though they are not only Berliners, they are also East Germans being in Berlin, they're also West Germans being in Berlin, and they still differ in their cheating behavior. Okay, what we didn't find was that there was a difference in the pro-social giving behavior of the two groups, which is interesting because apparently antisocial behavior, there is a difference for the two groups, but pro-social behavior didn't differ for the two groups we investigated here. But interestingly, so what we found is that people who are cheated more actually were less willing to donate in general. And this didn't have anything to do with being an East German or a West German. And I thank you very much for your attention.